Yes, so today we will be talking about climate change and the ecosystem. So let's first look at climate change. So, an important part of climate change is that it is happening right now. So, the climate on Earth is rapidly changing, and even recently, there has been drastic changes that there hasn't been in the past. So it is important to know what climate change is and what are the impacts of climate change. So these are all the effects of climate changes, and you can tell how severe it can be. But yeah, we will talk about what climate change is today and what causes climate changes, how climate change affects our lives, and what we can do about it. The first important difference I wanted to discuss is the weather versus climate, because these two words might appear similar, but they are quite different. So, a weather is a short-term state of the atmosphere. So, right now, if you look outside your window, you can see maybe it's sunny outside today, or it's rainy outside, or it can be a little cloudy. Those are all descriptions for weather, but a climate is a long-term pattern of weather. So it is not really a instant moment of rain, cloudiness, sunniness, but it is rather a long period of weather is called a climate. So yeah, here weather is a day-to-day state of the atmosphere, and it's short-term fluctuation, short-term changes, like sunny, windy, rainy. But climate is the average of weather conditions in a particular region over a long period of time. So it's an average over a long period of time. And it's typically 30 years or more. So example is that there is typically a lot of rain in the spring. So that is a part of the climate, since it has been taken an average for a long period of time. And let's look at a few questions. So this is from the BCE science exam. And the question is, the daily variation of atmospheric conditions is called.
B. Weather.
Yes, that is correct. The very daily variation is called the weather. So, yeah, that is why I made a difference of the weather versus climate before, as it is important to know the difference between these two. But yeah, weather is correct. Nice job. But now we get into a climate change. So climate change is a long-term change in a planet's average temperatures and weather patterns. And nowadays, it is primarily driven by human activities since 1800s. So if you look at this graph on the right, if you look at this graph, all the way until maybe over here, which is around 1800s, the fluctuations, the changes have been quite minimal, right? There has been small ups and downs in between, but ever since 1800, there has been a sudden rise, right? You can see it goes all the way up here. So that is why we mostly concluded that climate change is a long-term pattern of here temperature deviation by human activity. So it means the Earth is getting warmer, and this leads to problems such as stronger storms, melting ice, rising sea levels, and changes in rainfall patterns. The one primary reason that may drive to a climate change is from greenhouse effect. So a greenhouse effect is a natural process when gases in the air trap heat from the sun. So it keeps the earth warm enough for people, plants, and animals to live. But when there are too many gases, too much heat is trapped. And this makes the earth hotter, and this causes global warming. So on the right, here is a picture. So the solar radiation comes from the sun and it reaches the earth and it bounces back. And some of the heat is trapped inside by the greenhouse gases, but other heats are released back into space. But what's happening now is that when solar radiation on the right bounces off the earth, almost all of the heat is trapped back into earth and less heat is released. But let's look at how this works by this video. So this video showed the effect of greenhouse gases. So we have seen that greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide, methane, water vapor, NO2, all of those are examples of greenhouse gases that trap heat back to Earth. And this causes global warming. And we will see that carbon dioxide, a lot of it comes from burning fossil fuels. And methane also comes from agriculture, which we will see. But global warming means the Earth is getting hotter over time. So it happens, mainly because of greenhouse gases, like we've talked about before, when those trap heat in the air. And this extra heat changes the weather and climate and can cause problems like more storms, droughts, or melting ice. So yeah, on the right, here is a picture of a melting North Pole ice and a polar bear. So you can see that the polar bear habitat is being reduced because of human activity and because of global warming as it melts the ice. So global warming can cause climate changes. So we have talked about two things, the global warming part and the climate change part. So global warming can eventually lead to a climate change. So as the Earth gets hotter, the climate changes everywhere. So by global warming, there is hotter temperature, there is more frequent droughts, there's more frequent storms and floods, there are more frequent wildfires, and more frequent melting ice and rising sea levels. So the larger effect of global warming is that it can cause a climate change as a whole. So let's look at this question with regards to what we have discussed so far. So the rise in heat waves and floods globally may be due to the effect of which of the following? So here, heat wave and floods globally is the effect of climate change. And we were looking at what climate change is due to certain effects. So what do you guys think it is?
The answer is D, greenhouse gases.
Yes, great job. The answer, yeah, is B, the greenhouse gases. So greenhouse gases, like we have seen, causes a climate change. So greenhouse gases trap heat back to Earth, and that causes global warming. And global warming can lead to a lot of climate changes, like rise in heat waves or floods. So yeah, it's the greenhouse gases. But now let's look at um more of the causes of global warming. So what humans exactly are doing. Here we will look at why global warming is arising. And what really did humans do to cause this drastic event? So let's look at this video, which explains all the causes. So yeah, here we looked at different causes for global warming and also some of the effects, like we've talked about. But the main cause of global warming and climate change is the fossil fuels. The burning of the fossil fuels, as fossil fuels are great sources of energy when it is burned, but they emit greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane that traps heat in Earth and causes global warming. So remember that carbon dioxide were greenhouse gases like we've talked about. So these trap heat and causes eventually a climate change. So examples of fossil fuels that are burned are coal, oil, natural gas, propane, and kerosene. So all of these are burned to gain our source of energy. But some consequences is that they emit greenhouse gases of carbon dioxide. So we gain electricity from fossil fuels, right? So most electricity comes from burning fossil fuels as they release carbon dioxide and causes global warming. But there is a way to use clean and renewable energy, like the solar, wind, or hydro energy, that can reduce these emissions. So here's the second cause of global warming, which is agriculture. So humans grow animals for food and material. So we grow a lot of cows, for a source of meat and for milk. But cows and other animals fart or burp produces methane, which is a way stronger greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So as we um, get or produce more cows, then the cows that are all in this cage release methane into the atmosphere. So a buildup of a lot of farms and agriculture can affect climate change, can cause global warming and climate change. But another cause is deforestation. So trees can take in carbon dioxide and produce fresh oxygen by the process of photosynthesis, like we talked about last week. But deforestation means cutting down too many trees. So when you cut down too many trees, there will be less trees to take in carbon dioxide and produce oxygen. So this can cause global warming, loss of animals, dry land, and soil erosion. So yeah, deforestation is another cause of climate change. Let's look at the plastic waste as a cause for climate change. So making and burning plastic releases greenhouse gases like CO2. And when plastic waste goes to landfills, when you throw your plastic, it goes to this landfill. But in the landfill, it stays there for hundreds of years and it breaks down really, really slowly. And this process, releases greenhouse gases. And not only that, but it also harms the animals and ecosystems. So it can ruin the soil composition or it can kill many other animals. And yeah, this can overall cause a climate change. But here is a sort of pie chart of what greenhouse gas emissions look like on Earth. So 34% of greenhouse gas emission comes from energy supply. 24% of greenhouse gas release comes from industries, from building and factories. Um, 22% comes from agriculture, forestry, and land use. 15% comes from transport, by car, by buses, and 5.6% comes from buildings. So you can see some of the effects of that. But now let's look at this question, this I believe it was a theory question from BECE 2025 exam. So this was a part of a recent exam about um, global warming and climate change. So this figure right here, 1A, is an illustration of a natural cycle showing unnamed stages and processes labeled 1A, B, C, and D. The processes labeled P, Q, S, and T. So study the figure carefully and answer the questions that follow. So can you guys name each of the stages labeled A, B, C, and D? This might be not too clear, but here is A, here is B, here is C, and here is D. So what do you guys think this A is? This might be a little confusing, so you can kind of think this as a ground over here, like a ground, and this part is like the air. All of these parts above is like air. So, do you have maybe any guesses for what A is? So to give a little bit of hint, you can see that, of course, this is the ground, and we have factories leading to something up there in the air. And C, by the process of animal respiration, leads to B. And there are some exchange with A. From A, it goes to B with something, and from B, it goes to A by something. Yeah, this might be a little difficult, so I'm going to show you the answer. So, yeah, look at this carefully. So, A are the plants, and B is carbon dioxide in the air. And on the ground, C are the animals, and D are dead organisms. So, yeah, that's why I wanted to kind of look at this as a mini diagram. So, on the ground, there are plants, animals, and factories. But under the ground, there are many dead organisms buried. So dead organisms actually causes a production of fossil fuels. But here, above the ground, animals produce carbon dioxide by animal respiration, and factories directly produce carbon dioxide, so that's right. But plants have a process that gives rise to carbon dioxide, but also gives to the atmosphere something, but also gets back on something. So let's look at some of these processes, right? So what do you think the P part is right here? When the plants take in carbon dioxide, what do you think that process is? So does anyone remember this process? What is this process called? Taking in carbon dioxide by plant. So it's pretty simple. It's a part that we have already talked about. So yeah, P is a part of photosynthesis. Remember that photosynthesis takes in carbon dioxide and release oxygen into the air. The Q part is the respiration part. S, this part down here, is the decay of dead organisms. And T might have been a little confusing, but factories and industries produce carbon dioxide by the process of burning and combustions. So burning fossil fuels is a way that factories produce carbon dioxide. So this problem, the main importance of this is to know which part produces carbon dioxide and what the processes are. But let's look at this last section. State three activities of humans that could disrupt this cycle. So what are the three ways? So, um, we have discussed a few things. So things like burning fossil fuels and maybe things like deforestation, where it cuts down a lot of plants. So it's removing a lot of parts of A that can change this whole system, raising animals like agriculture, or burning woods or even plastics can contribute to a sudden rise in carbon dioxide. So, yeah, this was a pretty difficult question, but I hope you all are able to understand some of the processes in which carbon dioxide is produced. Okay, yeah, great. So now let's look at some of the more detailed consequences of climate change, and one of which is a natural disaster. So when there is a climate change, there are more severe storms, there are more droughts, and there are more wildfires. And another consequence is the rising water level. So when the temperature rises, the ice melts from the global warming, is added to the ocean, and it leads to an overall rise in seawater level. Because a lot of ice is added to the sea, many islands are currently sinking, and polar bears are losing their habitat. There are also impacts to human health. So, climate change can make people sick or uncomfortable, and hotter weather can cause heat exhaustion and dehydration. And bad air from pollution and wildfires can cause breathing problems and even possibly asthma. And a lack of clean water and food can lead to illness and hunger. And floods and storms can spread diseases really, really quick. So there are also direct impact to human health of climate change. Let's look at another question. I think this one you're able to answer. So, the consequences of greenhouse effect on humans include which of these four? Is it A, 1, 2, 3, and 4, B, 2 and 3 only, C, 1, 2, and 3 only, or D, 1 and 2 only?
Vậy thì bây giờ nhà vẫn vẫn à đến nghỉ em đi mà The answer is C.
If you said, yeah, if you said C, that is correct. But let's look at some of these answers. So, one says flooding of coastal cities. That is correct. There is a rise in water level by greenhouse effect and by climate change eventually. And desertification, a fertile area. Yeah, that is correct because it leads to a lot of fertile lands becoming dry by droughts. Three, the increased number of storms, the increased, and that is also correct as there are more natural disasters. But four is not necessarily correct because it says increased use of fossil fuels. But this is not a direct consequence of greenhouse effects. It is more of a cause. This is a cause. The increased use of fossil fuels can lead to things like flooding, desertification, and increased number of storms, but that is not a consequence. So the answer is C, 1, 2, and 3 only. Yeah. I hope, yeah, that makes sense for everyone. Um, but I will be moving on to how we can protect the Earth from climate change. So, how can we fix it? Um, what can we do to mitigate all these changes? So, one way is to reduce car use. So, since cars burn a lot of fossil fuel, we can walk or ride bicycles or use public transportations instead. Another way to minimize climate change is by using renewable energy. So, fossil fuel is not renewable, which means that once it is used, it is gone forever. But renewable energy can be regenerated endlessly without burning fossil fuels or harming the planet. And these include hydropower, like from the water flow, solar power from the sun, and wind power from wind turbines when they spin from the winds, and that produces energy. So no fossil fuel and more of renewable energy. Another way is by saving energy and saving water. So the less energy we use, the fewer fossil fuels are possibly burned. And this reduces greenhouse gas emissions. And also saving water can help reduce climate change because less energy is needed to pump the water, heat the water, and treat the water. So here on the right, it shows a couple ways of saving energy. You can save energy by switching the power off, by unplugging devices or anything that uses up energy, and saving power by turning off the lights when we are not using it. So these are a couple energy saving tips that can reduce climate change and the release of greenhouse gases. And another way is by changing the light bulbs to an LED light. So that's another possibility. So you guys might have heard the LED light, and this uses up less energy actually. And this is another way to save energy by using LED instead of light bulbs. So another way is by planting trees and saving paper. So planting trees helps fight climate change by absorbing carbon dioxide and producing oxygen. So since paper comes from trees and using less paper or recycling paper can help protect the forests and fight climate change. So we use trees for a lot of things. like paper. But if we waste paper, we will need to cut down more trees, and that can lead to climate changes and global warming. And another way is by reusing and recycling. So making new products require energy, and instead of making new products, we can reuse and recycle the items we already have. So recycled items can be processed and made into new products. So you can recycle your plastics, your paper, and your metal to go back to the factories to compress them into their original material and make other products without making the plastics and paper themselves. We can reuse materials. We can also reduce waste and not burn waste. So a lot of greenhouse gases are released by burning waste. So that is another reason why recycling is so important. So when we don't recycle, all of the trash goes into these dumps where they light them on fire to get rid of them. But lighting them on fire and burning them releases carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere, and those greenhouse gases can cause global warming rapidly. So it's important to not um, burn waste and reduce waste in general. So let's look at this question, and this was also from the BECE 2025 exam. So, which of the following waste disposal practices is best for plastic disposal?
The answer is D, recycling.
Yes, great job. The answer is D. Because the rest of these option, burning is not good. It produces too much greenhouse gases. Composting, which is just throwing out, it's not good too. It can harm the soil, the environment. Incineration is similar to burning, so recycling is the best option. Let's look at another question. So which of the following statements best describes the term green economy? So green economy is an economy that focuses on protecting the environment. So which of these can protect the environment?
Yeah.
The answer is C,
Uh,
reduce carbon emission.
yes, that is correct. Nice job. It reduces carbon emissions. That is really good for green economy, um, since it is protecting our environment. Reducing ecological services is a bad part. Loss of biodiversity, again, is bad for the environment, and degrading is bad. So reducing carbon emissions is the good part. So the answer is C. But green economy, it has a lot of parts, like preserving ecosystem services, since there are many initiatives and ways these services can act to protect the environment. Like we've just talked about, we can also reduce carbon emissions. And finally, we can maintain a biodiversity. And biodiversity means a variety of living things together. So right now on Earth, there are a lot of biodiversity. Like there are different plants, different animals, different insects, and more. So yeah, let's before we get into the ecosystem, the second part, does anyone have any questions about global warming and climate change? So any questions? If there are no questions, I will be moving on to this ecosystem topic. So yeah, here. Let's first look at a video of what an ecosystem is. So here is the video. So yeah, this was a broad and general overview of what an ecosystem is. So yeah, we have seen that an ecosystem is a community of living, the biotic component, and non-living, abiotic things that interact with each other. The biotic part includes plants, animals, microorganisms, etc. And the non-living parts include water, air, sunlight, soil, and more. But examples of ecosystems are things like forests, ponds, deserts, marine ecosystem, just the ocean. So it can be really, really small or really, really big. But a habitat is a part of an ecosystem where it is a place an animal or plants live. So this includes the home or living space of one species. And yeah, it is a narrower concept than ecosystem. Things like a polar bear's habitat are on the icebergs of Arctic region. So Arctic region as a whole might be an ecosystem, but just the iceberg is the polar bear's habitat. A frog's habitat may be somewhere on the rocks near the ponds. So the ponds is a whole ecosystem, but near rock ponds are part of the frog's habitat. But, so yeah, here is a picture of how it is shaped. So the whole part, including the living and non-living parts, it's called the ecosystem. But if you zoom in a little bit, here is a habitat where many organisms live. And even smaller than that, it can also have a community. It says plant community here, but it can be of any species. So let's look at this question from the recent VC test. So which of the following statements best explains the term ecosystem? It is, um, which of the following do you think it is? Yes, I think I heard D. That's correct. Yeah, great job. Um, so like we've said, the community, ecosystem is a community of living and non-living things interacting. So that those are the two components really important to the ecosystem. But inside this ecosystem, there is a concept of a food chain. So a food chain shows how energy passes from one living thing to another, and it tells what eats what in nature. So let's look at this video which shows the food chain. So here it is.
Monopoly App Banking. The first Monopoly board you play with an app. Effects added. Device and parental download required.
So yeah, I hope you liked the video and understood the concept of a food chain. So a food chain is a group of organisms that are consumed in a linear order or a straight order, passing nutrients and energy along the way. So producers are the first components in this cycle. So they receive energy from the sun. So all energy comes from the sun and it is absorbed by plants. But that energy is going to primary consumers when bugs eat the plant leaves, and the energy gets passed on to secondary consumers, things like frogs who eat the bugs, and it can be later be eaten by tertiary consumers like snakes, and even further up on the food chain, the quaternary consumers like the eagles can eat the snakes. So energy is passed on in this cycle. But when all of these organisms die, they are also decomposed by decomposers. So there are different trophic levels and roles in the food chain. So to recap, producers makes its own food, like plants, through photosynthesis. Consumers, like animals, cannot make its own food. And we are consumers. Humans are consumers. We eat plants or other animals to get energy. And there can be different stages like primary, secondary, tertiary, or quaternary consumer. But the third part is the decomposers, like mushrooms, bacteria, worms. And a decomposer breaks down dead plants and animals into smaller materials. And this process returns nutrients to the soil so new plants can grow. So once you look at the exam, it usually have this sort of diagram. So producers are at the bottom, and there's usually an arrow going up to the consumers, the different levels of consumers. and then it usually goes into, other consumers and, primary consumers, and then secondary, and then etc. But it all gets broken down back to decomposers, which gives back to the producers. So this is the usual diagram that you may see in the test. So let's look at this question from the BEC exam. So green plants have the ability to make their own food. So they're known as which? Yeah, I think I heard A, and that's correct. So producers have the ability to make their own food, and producers are plants. They make their own food by photosynthesis. Yeah, great job. Let's look at this next question. So a grassland ecosystem that consists of snakes, toads, and grasshoppers is most likely to produce a food chain of which?
B.
Did you say B? And yeah, I think I heard B from some of you, and yeah, that will be correct. Yeah, so the food chain starts from grass as the sun here. The sun gives energy to grass, and the grass gives energy to grasshoppers as the grasshopper eats the grass. And then the toads eat the grasshoppers, and then the snakes eat the toad. So this is how the food chain will be formed with these given organisms. Yeah, great job. Um, Now we get into a more larger picture of a food chain, and it's called a food web. So a food web shows how different food chains are connected in an ecosystem. So because most animals eat more than one kind of food, all the food chains are linked together. So if we look at this picture, this is a food web. So you can see that hawks, for example, this hawk can eat a lot of different things, like mouse, rabbits, or even snakes. And foxes can also eat different things like rabbits and mouse. But frogs, you can see that frogs can be eaten by two different things, like owls or snakes. So there are a lot of paths a food chain, a food web can have. So you can start with the grass. Maybe go to the grasshopper and then go to the birds, and the energy goes to the snake, and that energy can go to the hawk. So here is just one food chain within food web. So there can be a lot of different ways. And a food web is a great way to show how different organisms are connected by what they eat in an ecosystem. So let's look at this theory question from the BEC exam. So I hope you guys are able to answer this. So the following information is on the feeding habits of some organisms, and use all the information given above to construct a food web. So, um, can, so we are trying to construct a food web from the man feeding on grass cutter.
That is keep on that.
So here I can explain some of the food web that can be constructed. So we have a lot of different things. So I want you to see this. So a man feeds on grass cutter. It's right here, this part. So that part of the food web shows a connection that a man eats the grass cutter. Let's look at another case. The toad feeds on grasshopper. So where is it in the food web? It's here, right? Right here. Toads eat the grasshoppers. What about snake feeding on toads? It's over here, right? So the arrow going from the toad to the snake shows that the snake eats the toad. So that follows the description. We have another case of goat feeds on grass. So here, it's that part. The goat feeding on grass. And there are other parts like man feeds on hawk. So that is this part. Grasshopper feeds on grass. So it is this part. Hawk feeds on snake, which is this part. And finally, the grass cutter feeds on grass, which is this part. So I hope all of you can see this happening. So what I want you to get out of this is that a way to look at the food web. So you can see a lot of different things are connected one way or another. And you should be able to think about it and construct a food web yourself based on these descriptions. So yeah, great job everyone today. And thank you for listening. That was the last slide. So do you have any questions today about anything like global warming, climate change, or ecosystem? Do you have any questions for me?
Jeremy wants you to ask anything.
Yeah, any questions for me today? About any topics that we covered? Um,
You guys have no question. Yo, do you have one? Okay. Hello, Jabin.
yes. Mhm.
So yeah, they don't have any question.
Okay.
That is what they say.
Okay. Yeah. That's okay. Thank.
Yeah,
Um.
council to Mokasa.
So if
Yeah, you
you
were saying something.
no, if you don't have any questions, next week, we will be learning about the human body system.
Okay.